The Louisville men's basketball team 2-0 in exhibition play, and there's a lot of excitement amongst the fan base, but some have their concerns. My message to the fans, be patient.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the Cardinals, third year hosting this show. And for all the everydayers out there, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen every single day. And just a reminder, show is free and available 5 days a week. Your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Louisville is 2-0 in men's basketball exhibition play, 4-0 if you count the Bahamas trip. And there's a lot of excitement built up amongst the fan base, but some have their concerns. How justified are those? Well, the message to this fan base is be patient. We'll discuss the brutal start of the schedule. November and December is not going to be nice to this program in year one under Pat Kelsey, a brutal start to the year. And then to conclude this Wednesday edition of the show, we'll dive into another weekly mailbag segment. So on Monday, the Louisville Cardinals 99-54 victory over the Spalding Golden Eagles in their final exhibition matchup before the regular season opener on Monday. It was nice to see a crosstown matchup between Louisville and Spalding. We see, the matchups between Louisville and Bellarmine, but it was nice to see the one with Spalding as well. There was one with Simmons, I think, last season. So Louisville 4-0 in exhibition play, 2-0 recently against Young Harris and Spalding, and then 2-0 in the Bahamas preseason trip. You're telling me that you can go 2-0 in exhibition play and not have to worry about losing one of those games? Isn't that a weird concept? Nonetheless, I digress. But there's a lot of justifiable excitement. It's been a breath of fresh air. The playing style, the brand of basketball, the speed that they're playing, the three-pointers, my goodness, they've been filling it in from behind the arc. And I know the level of competition isn't up to par with what you're going to see starting on Monday, but it's still fun to see because it's something totally different on the court than what you saw, not even just the past 2 years, but maybe the past 3-4 years ago. And my goodness, it's been a while since we've seen good Louisville basketball. But there's been some concerns amongst the fan base about phases of the game. Some saying, well, I thought this was going to be better, or this wasn't necessarily what I thought it was going to turn out to be. And my personal response to those concerns are, I respect it, but be patient. That's the motto for the first month of the season, is to be patient, because as excited as we are, this is a brand new team with a brand new coach, coaching in the Power 5 for the first time. 13 new scholarship players. There was not one player on this team last year that's going to play significant minutes for this team this year. They're coming from everywhere. 13 new scholarship players. By default, it's going to take some time for this team to gel. It might take up into the start of the new year. And I don't like to say that, but again, you have to be realistic here. Pat Kelsey said it in a press conference before that preseason trip to the Bahamas that we don't have it figured out now. We won't have it figured out in the Bahamas. We probably won't have it figured out to start the season. Because the only way that you can build chemistry and get better as a team is live in-game reps against players that aren't wearing the same jersey as you at the end of the day. As great as it is to continue to be able to practice with these guys, the real way that you're going to see some tangible results and improvements is by playing different competition. And they haven't done that yet in terms of competition, up to par with them. So, and that's not a reflection on how I feel about the team. I am obviously obviously pretty bullish on them. I went on record with Locked On College Basketball host Isaac Shade last week and said that I think Louisville's 21-10 at the end of the year. I think it's a top 5 ACC finish for the Cardinals. I think they not only get back to the NCAA tournament, but they win a tournament game for the first time since 2017. Those are some pretty bullish statements and expectations. I fully am confident that the Cardinals can get there. But I also understand that it might come with some bumps in the road, because we'll talk here in just a minute about how tough and brutal the start of the year is going to be in terms of scheduling. Some really big challenges right out of the gate. So it's just going to take a little bit of time. And that's my whole motto here, is just to be patient. Issues in late October might not necessarily be issues in late December. Some might and some might not. Like, I know when I've talked to some fans, and even from my own observations watching both of the games, one thing that we saw was defensive rebounding around the basket, because of the lack of a true post presence. I think that I know that Louisville out-rebounded Spalding by like 15 or 16, but still it felt like more. It felt like the deficit was smaller, I should clarify. And I think that is definitely a justifiable piece of criticism. And you wonder, when you go up against better athletes and larger centers and more physically imposing big men, it might pose to be a problem. And I think that defensive rebounding around the rim is one thing that I do believe might be a concern, because not every team is going to be perfect. Like, Louisville will have their blemishes, and I think that defensive rebounding could be one of them. However, it is nice when you have 5 guys that definitely attack the basket. And I think that all comes with also communication. I think, learning defense from a team perspective, in terms of knowing your assignments and being able to switch the way that you need to, and trying to get the opposing big men out and onto the perimeter. Like, it takes some communication. It takes some building of the chemistry, and it's just going to take some time. And I hate to sound like a broken record or a broken clock. No, that's really punny. That was almost dad joke like. I'm sorry for the fans out there. That was pretty lame. But you get what I'm saying. Like, it just, when the defense improves, I think also on-ball defense is going to improve, because you have some really good point of attack versatile defenders that can guard different positions. I think the two things that I am worried about with this team, or maybe not worried might be a little bit of a wrong connotation here. I think things that I'm curious about. Number one, how is Louisville going to combat the size difference in terms of physicality? Like, they're not the beefiest team down low. Like, they don't have the largest centers. Like, when you do go up and play against like Omar Ballo here in a couple weeks down in the Bahamas, when you play Indiana, when you play Cooper Flagg and some other players for Duke, and the list goes on. How are you going to respond? How are you going to stop them from dominating in the paint, and how are you going to rebound? Like, those are two things that I am kind of focused on. But free throw shooting, I don't really have that huge of a concern. I know Louisville shot like 53% against Spalding, but a lot of that, I mean, James Scott might improve a little bit from his 40% average last year, but when it comes to like Terrence Edwards Jr., I think he's going to be a better free throw shooter than what we saw on Monday. Case in prior free throw percentage last year, he was 82%. I think that you're going to see him sort of revert back to that. It's just a small sample size. So I'm not really worried about the free throw shooting as much. Turnovers, Louisville had some turnovers that got sloppy with the ball against Spalding. I kind of contribute that to playing a team that you're probably going to beat, and you start to blow out early on. So you sort of take your foot off the gas in terms of attentiveness. And also some of that is you're playing extremely fast. Like, there's going to be turnovers when you don't have that chemistry built up and that cohesive mesh of a unit offensively. And I think that you're going to see improvements as Louisville continues through the season, or when they start the season, because with more game reps, I think a lot of that's going to be able to correct themselves. So not really worried about that. People are worried about, well, what happens when Louisville's three-pointers stop falling? And I think you also have to realize that you didn't really see a game plan against Young Harris. It was just go out there and honestly have fun, sort of a little bit more of the same against Spalding. So Maybe it's a different conversation a couple of games into the year, but as of right now, I'm not seeing anything on offensive side of the ball that's really all that concerning. The main things that I wanted to see: number one, movement without the ball; number two, communication; and number three, effort, which feels like three non-negotiable, automatic, prerequisites. But for the past couple seasons, they weren't. They were not. It was like it was not applicable in the past two seasons. But we saw that, and we saw that in abundance. And I'm really not worried about much heading into the season. I'm excited for the season to start. It is going to be a brutal start to the year. Like, there are multiple SEC teams in the non-conference schedule. You have the battle for Atlantis, and not to mention you have Duke in December. Like, this is not going to be an easy start to the year. That's why I'm saying if Louisville kind of stumbles out of the gate a little bit, still be patient, because I think they're going to make up some ground in ACC play. But when we come back, we're going to discuss the non-conference and early start of the schedule a little bit more in depth. You want to keep it locked right here on Locked on Louisville. And Cardinal fans, we've been having such a great time keeping it locked on Game Time. Look, basketball, it's coming up. Louisville opens up the season at the Yum Center in less than 7 days. Morehead State comes to the Yum Center on Monday. The best place to get those tickets is Game Time, because let me tell you, when you get the Game Time app, all of the features will literally prevent you from going anywhere else to get your tickets. You have the all-in pricing feature that you can toggle on, which removes any surprise fees at checkout. You also have the panoramic views from your seats, the lowest price guarantee, which means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, and the most protective ticketing coverage in the game right now. So do yourself a favor, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Resuming our discussion from just a minute ago, when you discuss this particular schedule and as it relates to the context of how good this team is going to be, I think it's worth noting that Louisville's going to take some punches early on in the year. Like, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be a little bit interesting because of the number of teams that you have to play that are going to be really tough competition. But as rough as it could be, there's also a very real focus here. And I'm going to reiterate that Louisville can't afford to just landslide. Like, they have to win some of these games. Like, some of the games against Power 5 competition that they have in the first 2 months, like, they have to win, because you can't dig yourself into a hole too large that you won't be able to dig yourself out of come ACC play early on in the year. Like, I'm not saying that you have to go undefeated, but I don't think that you can pick up more than 5 out-of-conference losses in this schedule, because that means that you're going to have a really, really good ACC slate. Now, I mentioned that I do think that Louisville goes 21-10, and I think that they go 13-7 in conference play. So what does that leave? 11-3. I'm sorry, 8-3. I'm completely losing my mind. I can't do basic math. I apologize. I thought I was going to have a good segue there. Then I realized that math has always been difficult me when I started third grade. But yes, I do think that Louisville is not going to lose more than 3 out of conference games. I think that those losses, you could go a couple different ways with where they come from. I do think that there is a potential for a fourth one, depending on how the battle for Atlantis goes. And if they lose a fourth one there, then Louisville obviously goes 20-11, in my opinion. I think both of those get you into the NCAA tournament anywhere with the schedule that Louisville has. I honestly think anywhere from about a 6 to a 9 seed. And it's not easy. I mean, in the month, let's look up to January 1st. At this very moment, and not counting the second game, which could be Gonzaga or West Virginia, you have Tennessee, Indiana, Ole Miss, Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina. That's 6 teams right off the bat, automatically in the top 25. 6 teams. And if you were to beat, well, I mean, put it this way. You could ultimately end up playing Gonzaga in the second round of the Battle for Atlantis. That would be 7 teams in the first literally month, because North Carolina is on New Year's Day. So it's a pretty interesting start to the season. That's why I'm saying that, yeah, you can afford to be patient with this Louisville team, but make no mistake about it, you can't go on a huge skid here. Like, you have to be able to hold your own and start to build your resume. And a lot of that comes to beating the teams that you have to beat, like the non-Power 5 teams, Morehead State, Bellarmine, Winthrop, UTEP, and Eastern Kentucky. Those 5 teams, like, I think that those 5 are must-win games for Louisville. Like, you know, if ands or buts about it, like, you have to win those games. And I think that they will, but you have to win those games. But you have Tennessee to start the season in early November. Like, it's the second game of the year. It's 2 Saturdays from now, 12 o'clock Eastern. First of all, why is that tip-off at noon? That, I don't know what it is about the city of Louisville and not getting night games, but I digress. You'll take on Indiana, which also is a noon tip-off, but that's a little bit different. That's in the Battle for Atlantis. Win or lose, you're going to take on either Gonzaga or West Virginia. And on the other side of the bracket, there's Providence, Oklahoma, Arizona, and Davidson. So formidable competition, to say the least, throughout that Thanksgiving Classic. So that's going to test you. Immediately when you come back, ACC SEC Challenge against Chris Beard and Ole Miss. Ole Miss is number 24 in the country currently. That's going to be an interesting game. Oh, and by the way, your first conference game, December 8th, Duke. Possible Final Four team. Projected number 1 team in the conference. Like, you're going to be tested early on. At Kentucky, that's never going to be an easy game. I know we have our questions as to how good both teams are going to be, but it's in Rupp Arena. It's not an easy place to play. December 21st at Florida State. Now, Florida State, it's going to be interesting to see how good they're going to be, because I have my doubts. Like, I don't think Florida State's a top 6 or 7 team in the conference, but you're on the road, and it's could be a challenge early on. I mean, on the road against an in-conference team early on, it's probably not it's probably, I won't say a recipe for disaster, because that kind of feels weird to say, because Louisville might not necessarily be favored at all, or if they are favored, not by much. But tough opposition there. And then January 1st, you host North Carolina. Good thing is you get Duke and North Carolina out of the way early, and you don't have to play them at all for the remainder of the season. But the bad news is it might come when you're still trying to figure some things out. Now, I don't think that this is all for nothing. I do think that Louisville is going to grow significantly as a unit through the first 2 months of the season. And they're going to be really polished and well off, I think, probably midway through January is when I personally think we're going to start seeing this Louisville team click for the better. If they start to beat some teams early on, hey, I'm okay with it. They have the talent. Like, this is a really talented team, and they have a brand of basketball that can be conducive to winning. Like, it can throw a wrench in other teams' plans. But what I will say is, don't expect this to be a team that doesn't have mistakes early on, because I've been seeing people get discouraged by, like, well, I thought this was going to be better. Guys, it's the end of October. It's going to take some time. Even with Louisville's best teams that we've had here in my lifetime, my 26 years on the earth, they've struggled a little bit out of the gate. And that's okay. First-year head coach, brand new team. It's going to take some time. But I believe in the unit. I obviously think that there's going to be a good amount of success. I think that they're going to get back to the ACC tournament. Or not the ACC tournament, I'm sorry, the NCAA tournament, and win a game there. But let me reiterate that they can't have a landslide to start the year. Like, it's tough because The opportunities are there to pick up some losses just off of ranked games alone. But I'll say that I think that they need to win some of those ranked games. Like if you, win some that aren't necessarily like if you win the 5 that you're supposed to against non-power 5 teams and you win a handful, like I said, you get to 8-3, you get to 7-4. I mean, it's okay. You just can't. I'm gonna put it this way. I don't think you can have a losing record in non-conference play. So it is what it is. But I'm bullish on this team. We'll talk more about the season as we get closer to opening night tip-off Monday, November 4th against the Morehead State Eagles. When we come back, we have a lot of great questions in the mailbag. Some about Colin Lacey. Will he return to Louisville? What will be the opening starting lineup on Monday evening for Pat Kelsey and the Louisville Cardinals? And much, much more when we return. And Cardinal fans, you're locked on right here on Locked on Louisville. And I appreciate you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. A lot of great questions that you all have asked that, sorry, I didn't really get much time to answer last week, but I do want to answer some this week. We start out, obviously, a little bit of background information. Colin Lacey has opted to redshirt. Whether he returns to college, whether he returns to Louisville is to be determined. If you had to give a percentage on your belief that Colin Lacey will play again in a Louisville uniform, what would you give it? For me, I do think he comes back to college. Like he might impress some pro scouts, but I do think he ultimately ends up coming back to college. But personally, I think he goes into the portal because there hasn't been like a confirmed, like, yeah, I'm redshirting, but I'm coming back. It's been, well, if we can make it work, both sides want to make it work, but you still have to make it work. Like the language of it just makes me feel uneasy in today's transfer portal realm. I think Colin Lacey returning, I would put probably about 35%. It's not too low to where it's 0, but I don't think it's too high to suggest that, yeah, it's a coin flip. I ultimately think that it's more likely than not that he does not come back. But then again, that's just my intuition. I don't know. We'll see. Predict the starting 5 for the men's basketball team in the opener against Morehead State. Oh, I feel like the better question, it might not necessarily come out like in the game against Morehead State. The better question, because of all the substitutions, is what's the lineup at the end of the game? But for the sake of this question, I will predict the starting lineup. I think you have 2 givens because Case and Pryor's been coming off the bench. I think Terrence Edwards Jr. and Chucky Hepburn have been, penciled in starters to begin the season. I think Corin Johnson is also going to be a player that gets a start. You have those 3 guys right there. I would then go Case and Pryor. I think Pryor coming off the bench doesn't really say much about, whether he's going to come off the bench now. So you have Terrence Edwards Jr., Case Pryor, Corin Johnson, Chucky Hepburn. And after that, I went a couple different ways. Do you go a little bit smaller and maybe put Rain Smith on the court? Or maybe you go with like Javon Hadley or Abubakar Traore or even Noah Waterman? Or what about more of a traditional big man with James Scott? I'm going to say Javon Hadley here. I think Hadley plays sort of that 4 role and have Pryor at the 5, and you have Terrence Edwards kind of being able to fill the 3-4, and they switch. It's positionless basketball. So I'm going to give the nod to Javon Hadley. I think it's Corin, Chucky, Javon, Terrence Edwards, and Case and Pryor. But this is honestly like throwing a dart at the board. And in the lineup that we see starting the game against Morehead State, like it literally could be different the next game against Tennessee. So that's something definitely to figure out. What do you think Louisville goes the remainder of the football season record-wise? Louisville has 4 games left, I think. Yeah, 4 games left. Gosh, we're already 8 games into the season. It feels like it just started. At Clemson, at Stanford, Pittsburgh at home, and then at Kentucky. I think Louisville will win against Stanford. I do think that they will ultimately clinch bowl eligibility against Stanford. I do think that they lose to Clemson on the road, and I think that they split one of Pittsburgh or Kentucky. Like, I don't think they lose both. I don't think that they win both. Obviously, I'm going with the split here. That would put them at 7-5 for the season, and 2-2 in these last 4 games isn't necessarily a disappointment, but maybe it is in the grand scheme of things if you had the team winning 10 regular season games like I did. But I'm going to go 2-2 here. I flirted with the idea of 3-1, but can they win on the road at Clemson? It's going to be tough. They've not won against Clemson since joining the conference. Like, I think that they beat Stanford. Can they beat Pittsburgh? Yeah, I think so. I think that Pittsburgh is a little bit overrated because they haven't played anybody. Can they beat Kentucky on the road? Yeah. That team feels like it's falling off the rails, but still Mark Stoops does a great job of always getting his guys ready for that game. So I don't know. And Louisville has their own issues that they have to address that have been issues since literally the start of the season. So technically, I really don't know. You promised a segment on Louisville volleyball. Do you think that they are national championship contenders? I haven't forgotten about that. Like, there will be a segment on Louisville volleyball. It's probably going to be a little bit closer to the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, Danny Buswell-Kelly has built a perennial national championship contender. Are they the favorites to win it all? I mean, probably not. But they took Pittsburgh to 5 sets. That's a tough thing to do, obviously. On the road, I might add. They beat SMU on the road, who beat Pittsburgh. And they've handled business throughout. Like, they've had some big-time victories against Kentucky and against Stanford. They've lost to Nebraska. But look, I mean, they're conditioned for the postseason. I mean, when you have players that have played so many postseason sets like Anna DeBeer, Elena Scott, the list goes on, Charity Looper, PK Kong, Kara Cressy. I mean, the list goes on. This is a veteran-led team that has been to the postseason. They've been to the Final Four. They've been to the national championship game. Yes, they are indeed a national championship contender, and it feels like every year they will be. So hopefully this is the year. They've been knocking on the door. Let's hope that this is the year when they literally will have the Final Four at the KFC Yum Center, that they are able to get the job done. But to answer your question, yes. Final question. Of the ranked games that Louisville is supposed to play early on in the season, which ones do you think that they are more likely to win? Very good question. So the ranked games at the moment, let's start, I guess we're talking like before 2025. So that would be, let's say, Tennessee, Indiana, Ole Miss, Duke, and Kentucky. Obviously, I don't think that they're more likely to win the game against Duke. I think that Tennessee, Indiana, Ole Miss, and Kentucky, I think those are winnable games. Tennessee has some players coming back, but they're also having to replace a ton. It's going to be pretty interesting. Ole Miss is going to be an interesting team. I think they're going to have a chance to win all 4 of those games. But I would probably go with Ole Miss. Number 1 is the team that I think that they would have a best chance to beat. I'm also going to go Tennessee. Like, I want to see how Rick Barnes' team does with no Dalton Connect, with no Josiah Jordan-James, with a couple other players. I think, no Jonas McAdoo. Like, they have Zakai Ziegler. They have, who's the other guy? Oh gosh, Chaz Lanier, the transfer from North Florida. Like, they have a good team, but it's early on in the season and they have to prove it. So I think I'm going to go Ole Miss and Tennessee. But that is going to wrap up the mailbag. That is going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Everyone have a great day. We're talking we're talking football, previewing Clemson when we come back. See you soon.